But it's also very good timing to bring in Tracey Sortwell. For anyone who has met Tracey or sat in a meeting with her, you'll be astounded by how many things she does for families in courts, especially within Cambridgeshire, but also nationally. Is Tracey here? She's here.
I am. Hiya.
Brilliant. We've got you. That's always a nice sign. So we met Tracey because she sits on the local family justice board in Cambridgeshire, where she chairs the family bench for the magistrates. But then it very quickly transpired she's also very active in working with the private law working group. She's active in the development of the MOJ design group on domestic abuse. There's so many bits of the pieces. And when you think that magistrates deal with the very vast majority of private law cases in courts, most public law stuff moves over to the judges, and the private law work is dominated by magistrates. I thought it was really important that we had the views of the magistrate and how we can work better with them, because there were some comments just came up about actually trying to connect with magistrates, trying to train them and educate them. It's a difficult challenge, so it'll be interesting to get Tracey's views on that.
Okay, lovely, thank you. Thank you for that lovely invitation, lovely introduction, Mike. I do actually echo Sir Stephen Cobb's comments at the beginning of his talk. It would be wonderful if we could all be in the same room together, obviously. Sadly not. As you see there, and Mike's already mentioned, I wear quite a lot of hats in the family justice arena. Really, I'm coming to you with the two hats you see there, the MA Family Court Committee Chair, which gives me the opportunity to provide you some views from around the country, England and Wales, and also some information from my own local court, being Cambridgeshire. You're probably aware, but just to be sure, I'm not a lawyer. Magistrates come from all walks of life. Mike's one as well. There's approximately 13,000 of us in England and Wales. We are trained to administer cases in crime, youth and family courts, and we always have a legal advisor with us to ensure we stick to the law. In the press, the headlines during the last year have been all about backlogs in the criminal courts. With the family courts being heard privately, we attract far less publicity, but the pressure and the backlogs are there. Right, I'm trying to change a slide and it's not changing, Mike. I haven't got anything on there that says to change. No, you're going to have to change it for me. Thank you. So first, a quick explanation about the Magistrates Association. So I need, obviously as a magistrate, I can't speak out about what I'm personally doing in the courtroom, but with my Magistrates Association hat on, I represent the views of magistrates through that role. And whilst magistrates have existed, believe it or not, for 650 years, the Magistrates Association only recently celebrated its centenary. The MA's original primary function was to provide training to magistrates, and at this time it was not delivered by the courts. People just turned up and said what they thought they would, the punishment should be. Of course, that didn't always go down well. There was lots of regional variations. In 1949, the Royal Commission drew the government's attention to the training of magistrates, and something called the Justice of the Peace Act provided that it should be managed by a magistrates court committee. It's then moved on we're now trained by the Judicial College, and it's provided locally by our legal advisors. So therefore, what Sir Stephen mentioned, we need to not only train our magistrates, we need to train our legal advisors, because they're the ones that do our training. So the MA's role has changed with times, but still plays an important role in providing training, and with its members being represented on the Judicial College training committees. And that's another hat I wear. I'm on the it's called the Magisterial Family Subcommittee, and we it's where we look at training for magistrates. So that will be my opportunity to put something in about mediation being part of our training. More importantly, the MA has grown to become the only independent voice of the magistracy and represents the vast majority of magistrates in England and Wales, both active and retired. And we will work with our members to ensure their views are used to influence law, policy and practice. So in doing this, we're able to work with key decision makers in Parliament and the government to help guide policy and promote sound administration. So sometimes you might hear us that we've given evidence to select committees, or we could be giving responses to sentencing council. Members like myself can be on working groups of the presidents of the family division. Similarly in crime and youth, we will have representatives. And this gives our members a powerful voice by representing their interests at these meetings with the key stakeholders across the justice system. Just in terms of representation, the family jurisdiction from the Magistrates Family Court Committee, we have representation, as you've heard, on the public working group, but we also have it on the private working group. We also have it on the public working group. And I'm on the Integrated Domestic Abuse Courts. We have a representative on the CAFCAS Judicial Liaison Committee, the Family Justice Council, and the Nuffield Family Justice Stakeholder Advisory Committee, to name but a few. I just take a little drink. Now, one of the outreach things we do at the MA is something called the Magistrates in the Community Project, which is our opportunity to let people in the outside world, outside of the judicial system, find out about what happens in court. We give presentations to schools, colleges, offices, community groups, religious and social groups, and we discuss issues about how we're appointed, what sort of cases we deal with, how guilt or innocent is decided, how sentence is reached, and topical issues are such as cybercrime and bullying. And we're currently looking at a family court module in this to give people more insight into the family court as well, which will, with the aim of perhaps people not thinking of court being the first place they go to when they have a disagreement about their childcare. Just for example of how good this outreach has been, in 2019 we were able to deliver presentations to over 80,000 people. Sadly, of course, because of COVID, that has stopped at the moment, but as soon as we can get back into meeting face to face, we will do so. Although I understand in Coventry and Birmingham area, they're actually doing these on Zoom into schools and buildings and sort of clubs and societies. Change slide, please. Thank you. So, family courts in times of COVID. What needs to be recognised is that the family court was under tremendous workload pressure way before COVID hit. And that's why the President set up the working groups of private and public law to look at new ways of working. As you may be aware, the court system, at least at magistrate level, we only briefly stopped working last March. In a very short time, we changed the way we do things. In some ways, this has had benefits, but these do not outweigh the necessity of bringing parties back into court for at least part of the proceedings as soon as it is safe to do so, especially for fact-finding and contested hearings, or as Stephen mentioned, issue resolutions, we should say now, shouldn't we? When lockdown was ordered, new and innovative ways of working had to be implemented in a day. Overnight, we had lists full of work, people expecting to come to court, depleted legal and admin staff, no magistrates, but those families were there. They needed to be dealt with. Fortunately, our legal advisors had already got the power to hear hearings remotely. And very quickly, our president, Sir Andrew McFarlane, gave them permission to do these over the telephone. Some legal advisors worked from home, whilst others had to attend court to access paper files. They triaged future lists, reallocated urgent cases to the salary judges, and adjourned others to dates later in the year. In some cases, legal advisors were able to case manage and conclude cases following an agreement with an on-duty team of magistrates who they would call for the consent order to be approved. Interestingly, in those first couple of months, the courts in the South East concluded nearly 50% of their cases in that way. Therefore, the backlog of this area of private law work did not grow in the same way as complex family, civil and crime cases. However, there must be concerns that legal advisors were able to resolve so many cases at that first hearing. Was this a COVID thing, or should these cases have been diverted away from court and possibly into mediation in some way? I'll talk about that later. We've now moved on from BT Me, thank goodness, in most circumstances, and we are currently using the less than perfect cloud video platform. Now, in most areas of England and Wales, we have magistrates hearing cases from court buildings, generally sitting as two due to social distancing. But although in some courts there's such inadequate space, or in fact the lack of technology, no internet connection, no screens, there are some magistrates who are still working from home, 15 months since that lockdown. While most of us have become used to video services in our personal work lives, such as Zoom, MS Teams, other services are available during this past year, I'm sure we will all agree they are not ideal for many situations. Video hearings are extremely difficult, both in terms of technology problems, but also because we are unable to be really certain that parties are, one, on their own, and two, in a safe place. By safe place, I don't just mean physically, but also mentally. It's far easier when dealing with parties face-to-face to know when to take a time out, when proceedings are getting too much. We can also watch for small reactions, both good and bad, which can indicate how well or badly the parties could begin to work together. That's lost when we're just seeing discombobulated heads on a screen. The added pinch point to a day's list is the timetabling. We have set times that parties dial in on for her first hearing days. For example, there's an hour. Therefore, if someone is late logging in or has technical problems, and this frequently happens, we can find that we're already 30 minutes into the hearing time before we can even begin. Pre-COVID, if someone was late, we might end up hearing another case first. More importantly, on days when there was a mediator available at court, we could put the case back if we thought it would be useful for the parties. This is something we are really missing. COVID hit us at the time that the family court system was already starting a series of reforms and pilots, if you've just heard from the previous speaker. One has just recently started in a local court, and it's long been recognised that the court process sometimes causes lengthy separation of one parent from their child or children due to disputes between parents when there's no safeguarding concerns. This is not good for the parties, but more importantly, not good for the children who are getting caught up in these delays and backlogs. A number of pilots are being trialled. In the local courts, the Watford pilot has been used. Called that simply because it started in that court. This process was started in 2019 because it was not unusual for families to be waiting in excess of 18 weeks for that first hearing following receipt of the application at court. The Child Arrangement Programme, as written by Sir Stephen Cobb, states that this should be happening in 6 weeks. We have recently started to use this system in Cambridgeshire, and our backlog was 12 to 14 weeks, partly caused by COVID. We were at 7 to 8 weeks. Just since February, we've actually now managed to reduce this down to 7 to 8 weeks, which I feel is a great achievement with the added pressures of COVID and the continuing rise in applications that are being made. However, this pilot only deals with improving the times for cases to get to their first court hearing. Once there, unless there is a consent order at that first hearing, the delays are mounting. Yesterday, I was in family court in Cambridgeshire for a second hearing. We could get an hour slot in mid-July. If it's 3 hours, it was mid-August, and a day hearing is now stretching out to the end of September. That is, they've already waited 7 to 8 weeks. It's worse in other parts of the country, with some adjourning listing their fact-finding hearings into November. And these delays are replicated, if not worse, in higher tiers of our family court. Can you change slide, please? Thank you. So what needs to stop? Whilst not wishing to make a joke of the matters we deal with in the family court, there is clearly a number of cases that should never be in a courtroom, but this is most definitely balanced by that number that should be due to safeguarding concerns. Am I looking for utopia? I don't know. But going back to that number of 50% of cases that concluded by consent during April and May last year, while some of them might have needed the court system because of allegations of domestic abuse, and then therefore CAFCAS would need to have undertaken safeguarding recommendations and considered that. We don't know how many of these could have been resolved if they had either gone to mediation first or would have benefited from an in-court mediation intervention had we been in face-to-face court situations. Only yesterday, I actually read a I was reading case papers, and a father had said to a mother that he would not discuss contact arrangements, he would see her in court. And the words, "I'll see you in court," were quoted by the mother. This case was resolved in just over an hour with a stepped contact order that means that mum will begin to start seeing her 7-year-old daughter for the first time in 17 months. Yes, there had been safeguarding issues in this case caused by mother's mental health. However, this was being exacerbated by an overused soap opera phrase. And it means that for many, going to court is the only direction they think they can go because that's what they see on TV. "I'll see you in court" is shouted across the screen. And that's, that's where people's minds go. The family court, as has already been said, should not be an adversarial area, and yet we create this when we hold fact-finding hearings when domestic abuse is alleged. And because we have a lower burden of proof in the family court, it can often be the second time that parents are in a court setting, basically hurling abuse at each other, hence my reference to Jeremy Kyle. And I could have added Jerry Springer. Even when there is no domestic abuse, there is a huge amount of blame and mistrust. This is something that we try to stop happening in the courtroom. And as happened yesterday, one parent started going back on what had happened. And I'm not trained as a mediator, but I have experience in court. And so I try and say, come on, we're not dealing with the past. The past has happened. That's something we need to park, learn from, and move on from. Well, we wouldn't be here today, would we, if there hadn't been that problem? But by keep mentioning what's happened, it's not going to improve things today and tomorrow. Let's move forward. And generally, they take that. Not always, but it's just a little reminder. And it worked yesterday. Often when they get to us, of course, they have read quite in-depth studies about their behaviour written by CAFCAS, and that does help settle some people's mind in a certain direction for the benefit of the child. But then it's linked to this is the parent who refuses to let the other parent see the child or children with no justifiable reason to reasonable people. In other words, when there is no safeguarding, and we see these happening regularly, it's standard. A new partner's on the scene, or a new baby is in that new relationship. And then going on to the one thing that is really challenging for any magistrate is when we have to say to one parent they cannot see their child. But we would only ever do this when there are just grounds to do so. These would include high-level safeguarding concerns, and in some cases, even when the child has expressed strong views that they do not want contact, and they are deemed of an appropriate age to be able to make that decision. The one thing that is really frustrating for us is when there is, as I said, no safeguarding concerns, but the parents cannot agree on anything, which means then that 2 or 3 strangers, aka us, magistrates, have to decide what school they go to, what sport they take part in, what football team they play for, what musical instruments they should play for, and of course, the times, days, holidays that a child is permitted to go on and when they can see their parents. And this often needs to be prescribed down to the minutes of the days, using calendars 2 to 3 years in the future. Court is not the place for this, as it just makes matters worse, as neither parent will feel they have got what they want. Wouldn't it be better if these types of cases could be heard by mediators, who, I know, you are much better placed and more importantly trained to find some sort of resolution? If the agreement is reached, is then thought needs the backing of a court order, then isn't that the time that we could suggest that a court order is made, but not via a C100? Perhaps, as I said at the beginning, I'm looking for utopia, but we know something needs to change. So change slide, please, Mike. The future. I have used the word returnees, and I do mean returnees. To move forward, we need to know where we are today. Currently, you've heard, there's no formal mediation training for magistrates. Instead, the chair, or presiding justice as we are now called, is expected to use their wealth of knowledge in the family court to guide the parties through the process and to recognise situations where, with a little bit of gentle discussion or an agreement or consent order, might be possible. I'll admit my knowledge was very poor up until a few months ago. I was aware that there had been some court mediation happening pre-COVID, and I understood what happened at Amayam and the exceptions to these, but it was pretty basic. This must surely change, and changes have already started in Cambridge and Norfolk, and I think it's Essex that the Family Mediation Trust have delivered training to. These were brilliant hour-long sessions delivered to the family panels and covered what role does family mediation play, how is family mediation governed, and what a trained mediator and accredited mediator can do. How can clients access mediation pre-court and during court proceedings? And a look at cases that make the most progress. There was something about legal aid and also key trends that they see in clients. The session was excellent, generated many questions, and even interested some magistrates in thinking about becoming mediators themselves. And I have since been privileged to observe a mediation session from which I learnt so much and is now informing the way I personally conduct my hearings. Where do we go from here? Along with the reforms that are happening, there is a need to push for mandatory MIAMs and mediation training for the judiciary so that we have an informed understanding of how to approach parental conflict. It must not just be left to the experienced magistrate. We would, of course, welcome back in the in-court mediators, because things are going to slip through the net. Some things will need safeguarding be looked at and so it does need to go through the court process, but your help at court will always be welcome. We must also ensure that the child's voice, when age appropriate, is heard and their contributions are acknowledged. Every case is different, and we mustn't fall into the unconscious practice of placing cases into silos and do to one case what we've done to a previous one just because it's very similar. The Family Justice Young People's Board have a very strong voice on this aspect. Children are different. Every child is different. Remember that, and it's a very strong message that has stuck with me from one of their presentations. There's other changes that might work. The pressures on the court could be reduced, perhaps if the consent order had an additional phrase saying that they cannot reapply to court if the contact arrangements in the consent order have broken down, unless they have tried mediation first. After all, if they can agree something on one day, there has to be a very good reason why they can't do it later down the road. And as you've heard from His Honour Judge Cobb, there is much happening to try and find a better process in the family court. These things are going to take time, but there is definitely a desire and top level support to get something done. I think there is a chink at the light of the tunnel. Thank you for listening.
Right, thank you. That was a really helpful and interesting presentation, and I think it just shows the breadth of the work that the magistrates do and how integral they are to the world of the mediator. A couple of questions have come in, and I know we're running a little bit late, but we'll catch up at some point today, I'm sure. But I just wanted to pick up that Shilali, are you there? You've asked a question about the understanding the impact of decision making in court. Just wondered if you want to ask your question. Is she there? No, she's probably on mute somewhere.
Perhaps leave it to the question and answer
yeah,
session.
we'll come back to that one because I think it was quite an interesting one. But I think there's lots of elements to the court, and I know you sat into a mediation session with Helen. I just wondered what your initial observations were about the impact of that mediation.
Yeah, it was so calm, which was what I met with parents coming to court and thinking, oh, I'm in court so I can get my point across, sort of thing. They get a bit bolshy sometimes in court. We obviously have to try and manage that as best we can because it's not conducive to a resolution in any way. No, it was, I felt the time that a mediator gives, Helen gave to the parties to put their point across, and she kept them on track. It was fantastic to watch your training being put into practice. As I said, I learned a lot about keeping people on track, stopping them from the blame culture. What's happened's happened. We need to move on. That was a really strong message that I took across, and something that I feel all family magistrates need to know and need to put into their conscious when they're sitting there with two warring parties, basically, because they wouldn't be in court if they weren't in disagreement. That's what was lovely yesterday. Even though they were on screen, the mother admitted she'd read, it was actually a section 37, so had been done by the local authority, and it basically told her that she was being selfish. There was absolutely no reason why dad couldn't be part of her child's life. It was, it just, she actually came on screen and she said, I'll admit it, I've been wrong. But it was one of those cases where that could have happened outside court with one of you, and you could have come in, sort of saying they've had a great conversation out there, and this is what they've decided. In actual fact, what they decided was that it was live with mother, and father could see the child anytime as could be agreed between the parties. We didn't even put what days, hours, anything. It was one of those wonderful, wonderful consent orders that we rarely get.
It's nice when that happens. I've got a question from Tony Woods. Tony, you got a question?
Yes, thanks, Mike. Tracey, thanks for all that. There's probably lots of experienced mediators and probably combined as mediators with their lawyer work. I've been a sort of family lawyer for 40 years and family mediator for 25. Tracey, it just absolutely flabbergasted me, but there again, I shouldn't be surprised that the training for magistrates and even judges is so sparse. And I think we've all been at this for so many years, so it doesn't surprise me that we're still in the same position we were 10, 20 years ago. And it's incredibly disappointing, and something definitely needs to change. And I don't know how quickly that's going to be done, but we had a pilot scheme in the Northwest led by Andrew Greensmith, now Judge Greensmith, who tried his utmost to try to get things moving, working with in-court mediators, and the whole system fell down. And I found over the last 12 months, apart from a couple of really important cases which they felt needed an experienced mediator, the run-of-the-mill cases, I haven't had one case from a magistrate's court being sent out to the mediation service, which again, the court service complains about delays, but if there'd been proper training, that could have been alleviated quite a lot. And just the second point to make, Tracey, consent orders. I found that a number of mediated settlements have gone into court as proposed consent orders, and district judges and magistrates refuse to make orders. They've in effect said, well, you've sorted it all out, you've managed to agree everything, there's no need to make an order. And again, that's really sad and disheartening for clients. So just 2 points, I thought I should make them.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that on that last point, there's a process we have to go through. Everything has their own little flow charts, don't they? And they would have been adhering to the no order principle. And so the questions would have been asked along those lines. And I did ask the question yesterday, are you sure you need an order to do, now you've agreed it this far, do you want, I usually say, do you want the security of a court order? Because, you brought this to court. And so that's why I made a consent order, even though they had agreed everything.
I think it is an interesting one. There's a few comments about in-court mediation. I'd like to maybe come back to that later, because I think it's almost a massive topic in itself. We're involved in a court, and all courts probably run it very differently, and it's possibly a separate meeting where we should all get together and talk about in-court mediation and the good and the bad, and how we sort of champion the way we think it could be run better. Just one clarification point before we move on. What did Tracey mean by making mediation proposals legally binding, but not by C100s?
Oh, that was when, just what we've been describing. If there has been, if a party goes to mediation and they haven't actually applied to court, they haven't done the C100 application, so they've gone the route that we would like them to go. They've come to you, not I'll see you in court. But they get, as mediators, you get to a stage where you feel they need that extra support. They need that, the legality of a court order, so that they've got something in place, so the bad that's happened in the past is protected. This way forward is protected because of, I'm explaining it badly, but currently, if they have that mediation, they get an agreement, but one party's feeling a little unsure that the other party's going to adhere to it, they would have to go through the full C100 application form and have a hearing in court and go through the whole process again, almost, before, and there would be more delay. If it could just be a direct application, we have an agreement, can this be turned into an order? It would cut the cases. It's it's something that I am in the process of putting together with my MA hat on as suggestions to the reform group that Sir Stephen Cobb is on.
Okay,
ideas
brilliant.
that have come from